It was 10:47 p.m. when Lena realized she had been staring at her phone for what felt like an eternity. The office chat window had a blinking cursor, waiting. She had sent a simple message to her coworker, Oliver, asking for clarification on a project update, yet the response had not arrived. And what caught her off guard wasn't the delay, it was how much the waiting made her notice him. Lena shook her head, laughing softly at herself. Why did a work message feel so personal? She remembered the quiet way Oliver always acknowledged her in meetings, the way he seemed to listen, not just to her words, but to the small hesitations behind them. Even from across the room, his presence felt different, calm, steady, and somehow unintentional. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type again, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and watched the ceiling, thinking about how strange it was to be so drawn to someone she barely spoke to outside deadlines and team check-ins. Her thoughts wandered to the little things, how he always made room for her suggestions, how he never interrupted, how even his silence seemed considered, deliberate. The cursor blinked again, and Lena realized she was holding her breath. She told herself it was ridiculous. This was just work. But the way he waited, the way he hadn't instantly replied, it unsettled her in a way that made her heart beat just a little faster. There was something about that quiet patience, a restraint that felt like it belonged only to people who truly observed others. She thought about the stack of papers on her desk, the half-finished spreadsheet, the flickering lamp. The office had emptied hours ago, leaving a kind of hush that made every small noise feel amplified on the other side of the chat. Lena's mind circled around him as if tracing invisible lines between them. She remembered last Thursday how he had stayed late to help her sort through a misfiled report, how he never made it sound like an obligation. He just showed up. No words, just presence. That evening had lingered in her thoughts longer than she cared to admit. Now, sitting in the dim light of her office, Lena felt a peculiar anticipation. There was no flirtation, no hidden agenda, just the simple, silent tension that comes from being unexpectedly noticed, from being considered, and she couldn't help wondering if Oliver's pause in responding was as intentional as it felt, or if she was imagining the significance of it all. Minutes stretched, and Lena felt herself growing restless. She stared at the blinking cursor again, willing it to move, willing him to type something that would break the delicate spell of waiting. It was strange, the way a single delayed reply could make her heart feel a bit lighter and a bit heavier at the same time. Her phone buzzed and she jumped slightly, her pulse racing before she even looked. But it wasn't Oliver, just a reminder about tomorrow's meeting. Lena exhaled and smiled faintly. Her fascination hadn't faded. She found herself wondering why she cared so much, why his patience felt magnetic, why even a simple acknowledgement from him could make her entire evening tilt sideways. She realized she wasn't thinking about work anymore. Not really. She was thinking about the way people could leave impressions without trying, the way someone's silence could speak louder than their words. She imagined Oliver reading her message right now, pausing just long enough to consider it before typing, and she felt a soft warmth spread across her chest. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. The thought made her chuckle softly, but when she looked back at the chat window, the cursor still blinked, empty. The night had deepened outside, and she realized she was alone with her thoughts and a quiet, unspoken connection she couldn't quite name. Lena leaned back again, staring at the ceiling, and felt the faintest thrill of possibility, as if waiting itself had become part of the story, part of the invisible thread stretching between them. Somewhere, she thought, he was poised to respond, and she could almost sense the exact moment it would happen. Her heart fluttered in anticipation, caught between curiosity and the strange comfort of someone's deliberate silence. And just as she reached for the phone again, she froze. A tiny ping sounded, not a notification from another app, but from the office chat. He was typing. The moment the typing indicator appeared, Lena's chest tightened in a way that surprised her. It wasn't just the message itself, it was the deliberate rhythm of it, the quiet patience that seemed to linger in every tap of his fingers. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen, as if touching it too soon might break the fragile tension between them. Oliver's reply finally appeared, short and precise, exactly what she needed for the project. Yet Lena found herself reading it again, savoring the careful wording, the thoughtful punctuation. It was only a work message, but there was an almost imperceptible weight to it. She wondered if he even realized how something so small could feel like a bridge, connecting two separate evenings across an empty office. She smiled, a little to herself, realizing she had been staring at the screen for nearly 10 minutes. Her eyes traced the faint reflection of her lamp in the dark window beside her desk, thinking about the quiet evenings they often shared here, side by side, even when they didn't speak beyond the tasks at hand. There was something comforting in knowing someone else existed in the same stillness. Her mind wandered back to the moments earlier in the week when they had worked late on the quarterly reports. She remembered how he had quietly sorted through the mess of documents without complaint, offering guidance only when she asked, and always in that calm, measured tone that somehow made her feel both seen and at ease. She couldn't quite explain why it mattered so much to her, but she felt a warmth thinking about it. The chat window went quiet again, leaving Lena alone with the soft hum of the office air conditioning. She leaned back, hands resting on her desk, and let herself sink into the quiet. The gentle tension of waiting had shifted, turning into a feeling she didn't fully understand, a sense that she mattered, that her words and actions had been received with care. She glanced at her phone, unsure whether to reply immediately or let the conversation breathe. The thought of taking the time to compose a response, making sure each word felt right, made her feel oddly vulnerable. It was just work, she reminded herself, yet the careful, measured way Oliver had written made it impossible to treat it casually. Her thoughts drifted again to the small gestures he often made, holding the door open when she left the office, saving her a seat in the morning meetings, the subtle nods of encouragement when she spoke. None of it had been intended to catch her attention, she was certain of that. Yet now every detail seemed to resonate differently, creating a quiet rhythm she hadn't noticed before. Lena tapped her fingers against the desk, listening to the faint sounds of the night beyond the office windows. A streetlight flickered, casting shadows that stretched across the walls. She realized she had been holding her breath again, waiting for another ping, another sign that he was there, paying attention. Even as rational thoughts tried to remind her this was just professional courtesy, her heart insisted otherwise. She thought about how rare it was to encounter someone whose presence felt almost magnetic without any overt effort. Oliver wasn't flashy, didn't command attention, but somehow his patient, steady demeanor had carved a space in her mind she didn't even know was available. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet entirely undeniable. Lena's eyes fell to her desk calendar, marked with deadlines and meetings, and she noticed the quiet irony of the situation. The very person she had relied on for professional guidance now lingered in her thoughts in ways that had nothing to do with work. She shook her head gently, smiling at the thought. Some connections weren't loud. They were patient, deliberate, unfolding in quiet pauses and delayed replies. Another ping interrupted her reverie. This time it was a follow-up message, confirming the next steps. She felt a faint thrill, not because of what it said, but because of the rhythm. The way he had taken time before replying, the gentle weight of his consideration. She realized she had been waiting, not just for the words, but for the patience, the care, and the quiet attention he seemed to offer naturally. The office lights dimmed slightly as the night deepened. Lena stared at the chat window, a strange combination of satisfaction and longing washing over her. There was something about being noticed in silence, about the unspoken care behind measured words, that made her heart feel lighter and heavier at the same time. She picked up her pen, twirling it absent-mindedly, thinking about how the world outside could move fast and loud, yet here, in this quiet moment, a single thoughtful reply had managed to pull her in completely. And then, almost instinctively, she found herself wondering, did he even know the effect his patience had on people? Or was it simply who he was, unaware of the quiet sway he held over moments like this? Lena exhaled, her shoulders relaxing, yet the anticipation lingered. She knew this connection was delicate, undefined, and entirely fragile. And somehow, that made it all the more compelling. The next morning, Lena arrived at the office with a quiet anticipation she couldn't quite explain. Even as she hung her coat and settled into her workspace, her thoughts lingered on the previous night. The memory of Oliver's measured response and the subtle way he had waited before typing made her pulse quicken more than she cared to admit. She tried to focus on her tasks, opening spreadsheets and reviewing emails, but every time the chat window blinked, she found herself pausing. There was an odd intimacy in the way their communication flowed, brief, professional, yet charged with a gentle attentiveness that made ordinary interactions feel significant. During the team meeting, she caught glimpses of him across the room. Oliver sat with his usual composed posture, jotting down notes, occasionally glancing at her when she spoke. Nothing overt, nothing meant to draw attention, yet she felt a quiet connection, a reassurance that lingered without words. After the meeting, Lena returned to her desk, and the chat pinged again. Her heart skipped, but she reminded herself to stay grounded. The message was simple, clarifying a few points from the presentation. She smiled at the precision and care in his words. It struck her that in a world that often felt rushed and careless, moments like this were rare and quietly precious. She reflected on how easily people could be swept along by busyness, forgetting the importance of small, deliberate actions. Oliver's manner had a quiet gravity to it, the kind that made someone feel considered, valued, and noticed without fanfare. Lena realized she had been unconsciously craving that very thing, perhaps in every corner of her life, but had only recognized it now in his company. Later, while organizing documents, she caught herself staring at the phone again. Another message arrived, this time from a different coworker, but she barely registered it. Her mind remained entangled with the memory of Oliver's calm attentiveness, the way he seemed to create a space where words weren't rushed, where patience mattered. Lena thought about the subtle lessons in patience he had shown her just by waiting. It was remarkable how waiting could transform a simple exchange into a meaningful interaction. She realized that she had learned more about quiet presence from him than she had from any manual or workshop. She found herself replaying the brief exchanges, noting how he paused to consider, how he typed with intention, and how he responded with clarity but without urgency. It was a rhythm she had never noticed before, and yet it resonated deeply, creating a sense of stability she hadn't realized she longed for. Even as the office buzzed around her with phones ringing and keyboards clacking, Lena felt a strange stillness whenever she looked at the chat window. The anticipation of his careful replies gave her a peculiar comfort, a gentle reminder that some people's presence could be grounding without any need for fanfare. During lunch, she stepped outside to get some air. The cool breeze brushed against her cheeks, and she thought about how easily life could become a blur of tasks and deadlines. Yet, in the midst of it all, there were fleeting moments of recognition, of quiet attentiveness that carried more weight than anyone might realize. Returning to her desk, she noticed another ping. This time, it was Oliver, checking in on a document she had been responsible for. The simplicity of the message belied its impact. It was just work, yet the way he had approached it, considerate, patient, precise, made her feel a quiet warmth. She realized she had been holding herself back from noticing these small gestures, dismissing them as ordinary. But now, each interaction felt like a small thread weaving a subtle connection, a silent acknowledgement that went beyond words. Lena leaned back, glancing around the office, and felt a mix of relief and curiosity. There was a tension in the air, a delicate anticipation that made her wonder what other moments of quiet connection were waiting to unfold. As the day drew on, she found herself imagining the possibility of understanding him better, of noticing the rhythms in his patience, the way he observed without intruding. It was a lesson in attentiveness she didn't expect to appreciate, yet couldn't ignore. By the time she packed up her things for the evening, Lena's mind was alive with thoughts of subtle gestures, the weight of measured words, and the quiet tension of waiting. There was a feeling of expectancy that lingered, fragile and unspoken, yet compelling in its simplicity. And as she walked to her car, phone in hand, she saw that tiny blinking cursor again. Oliver was online. The evening air was crisp as Lena stepped back into the office for a late catch-up session. Most of her colleagues had already gone home, leaving the space quiet except for the faint hum of computers and the occasional clatter of her own keyboard. She settled at her desk, phone in hand, already anticipating the soft rhythm of messages that might come from Oliver. It wasn't the work that drew her in tonight. It was the space between their exchanges, the pauses and delays that seemed so deliberate yet completely unassuming. There was a gentle artistry to the way he waited before replying, a careful thoughtfulness that made every word feel considered, meaningful. Lena couldn't help but be captivated by it. She glanced around the empty office, the familiar layout suddenly feeling intimate in the absence of others. Her eyes landed on the window, where the city lights reflected softly, mirroring her own quiet tension. She thought about how ordinary evenings often slipped by unnoticed, yet somehow this one felt significant, simply because of the presence of someone who truly listened, even from a distance. Oliver's chat pinged softly, and Lena hesitated, letting her heart settle before opening it. His message was succinct, clarifying a few details about the presentation she had been reviewing. But as usual, it wasn't the content that mattered. It was the measured timing, the deliberate patience that seemed almost magnetic. She smiled faintly, realizing she was no longer reading just the words, but the rhythm behind them. She leaned back in her chair, thinking about their past interactions. There had been countless moments when his attentiveness had left a quiet imprint on her day. A patient nod during a discussion, a thoughtful suggestion that didn't overshadow her own ideas, a willingness to wait and consider, rather than rush in. Lena felt a strange warmth, a recognition of the rarity of such steadiness in a world that often demanded immediacy. Minutes passed as she reviewed her notes, her eyes occasionally flicking to the chat. She realized she had been subconsciously measuring the gaps between messages, finding comfort in the spaces where thought had been given. It was a subtle, unspoken exchange, yet it carried a weight that Lena hadn't expected to notice so keenly. She thought about the power of waiting, the gentle tension it created. Oliver's patience wasn't about delay, it was about respect, a recognition that every interaction deserved attention. In his presence, even virtual, she felt acknowledged in a way that went beyond simple communication. Lena's fingers twirled her pen, tapping lightly against the desk. She reflected on how much she had underestimated such small, deliberate acts. It wasn't grand gestures or dramatic declarations that captured her attention. It was the quiet consideration, the unhurried care, the subtle way someone could hold a moment without forcing it. The office felt colder as the night deepened, yet Lena didn't notice. She was absorbed in the soft hum of anticipation, in the thought of him pausing before replying, in the way his careful words seemed to echo beyond the screen. Each message was ordinary in content, but extraordinary in its quiet impact. She remembered last week when they had stayed late sorting a misfiled report. He hadn't made a single comment about the inconvenience. He had simply stayed, methodically helping, never rushing, never showing impatience. And now, even in something as simple as a chat, that same presence lingered, unseen but deeply felt. The phone pinged again. Lena's heart skipped. Another work-related message. Yet again she found herself reading it twice, not for content, but for the quiet intention behind it. She could almost sense the deliberation, the small pause before typing, the thoughtfulness imbued in every word. She leaned back, a soft sigh escaping her lips. The fascination had grown into something she couldn't quite define, a respect for attentiveness, a deep appreciation for patience, and a quiet longing to understand someone who seemed to move through life with such steady grace. For the first time, Lena realized how rare it was to feel drawn into someone's presence, not by charm or conversation, but by stillness and consideration. The connection she felt was subtle, delicate, yet entirely compelling. Her phone vibrated once more. The cursor blinked. She froze, sensing that another message was imminent. And in that small, quiet moment, Lena felt the thrill of waiting all over again, suspended between curiosity and the gentle pull of something she couldn't quite name. The office was silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Lena sat at her desk, staring at the blinking cursor on her screen. tonight felt different, more charged, more fragile. She realized she had been holding her breath, waiting for a response that would arrive not just as words, but as the culmination of the small, deliberate attention Oliver had shown all along. When the message finally appeared, she read it slowly. It was concise, professional, just what she needed to complete her report. Yet the way it landed, carefully timed, thoughtfully written, felt like the closing of a circle she hadn't realized had been forming. In that instant, the rhythm of their exchanges, the pauses, the quiet patience, all made sense. It wasn't just work, it was understanding, a recognition of presence that needed no overt gestures. Lena leaned back, letting herself breathe, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The late-night hours, the anticipation, the subtle tension, it had all built toward this gentle acknowledgement. She thought about how rare it was to find someone whose consideration was so unassuming, yet so profound. Oliver hadn't sought attention. He had simply given it through measured presence, through silent respect for time and thought. As she reflected, Lena realized how much she had grown attached to these quiet moments. They were not dramatic, yet they had carved a space in her thoughts she hadn't anticipated. She felt a soft warmth in her chest, a combination of relief and appreciation, as if understanding someone's rhythm could be just as meaningful as hearing their words aloud. The office seemed different now, filled with a calm she hadn't noticed before. Every object, the desk, the chair, the faint glow of her monitor, felt imbued with significance because it had been part of these shared, silent exchanges. She smiled, recognizing the subtle power of presence, the gentle strength of someone who knew how to wait, how to observe, how to make space without filling it unnecessarily. Lena's eyes wandered to the window. The city lights shimmered against the darkened sky, and she imagined the quiet streets outside, the people walking home, the unseen moments of patience and thoughtfulness happening all around her. It was humbling to think that such small actions could ripple through someone's life so quietly, so profoundly. She realized that her fascination with Oliver wasn't rooted in his words or even his work. It was in the patience, the attentiveness, the calm assurance that he carried into every interaction. There was a kind of intimacy in it, not romantic, but deeply human. It was the rare feeling of being seen, truly considered, without the need for ceremony or display. Lena felt a smile tug at her lips. She knew that this would change the way she looked at connections, small gestures, and the quiet spaces between words. Waiting, she thought, wasn't just about time passing. It was about the care and thoughtfulness that could turn ordinary moments into something lasting, something memorable. She glanced back at her phone. The chat was silent again, yet she didn't feel the anxiety that had marked previous nights. Instead, there was a gentle satisfaction, a sense of closure, and a quiet joy in understanding what had drawn her in from the very beginning: the patience, the attentiveness, the understated presence that had quietly anchored her. For the first time, Lena allowed herself to relax completely. The blinking cursor no longer carried tension. It was simply a reminder that connections could be subtle, that attention could be given without demand, and that some of the most meaningful moments weren't dramatic. They were patient, thoughtful, and quietly enduring. She stood and stretched, feeling the night's stillness wrap around her like a soft blanket. The office had become a place of reflection, not just work, and in that reflection, Lena understood something essential: that the way someone waited before replying could say more than 1,000 hurried words. It could draw you in, teach you patience, and leave a lasting impression on the heart without ever being overt. As she walked to the door, phone tucked away, Lena felt a calm clarity. The connection she had felt, the quiet tension that had filled her evenings, had become a lesson in the subtle beauty of human consideration. She knew she would carry it forward, appreciating the small, deliberate acts of attention in everyone she met, seeing them with the same quiet wonder she had learned from him. Outside, the night was deep and still. Lena inhaled the cool air and smiled softly, feeling a sense of fulfillment. The waiting, the anticipation, and the understated presence had all led her here, to understanding, to appreciation, to quiet contentment. And in that moment, she knew the connection had been enough, just as it was, leaving her heart quietly full. The soft echo of possibility lingered in her mind, a gentle reminder that some of life's most profound moments happen not through force or urgency, but through the patient, careful presence of another. The story had reached its natural close, leaving Lena with a newfound sense of peace and insight, and the memory of someone who had quietly, patiently made her feel seen.